watercolor. So some have some experience and others not so much. I really hope this, I'm very casual. If when we get painting, get up, move around, except Beth, she can't move. No.
I can move.
She can
but
move.
I have
She
to
can
put
move.
my leg up a lot.
Yeah. Ask questions of other people about their equipment, about what's how they use certain applications. I will tend to do some demos, at which point I'll have you come up as I'm doing the demo and then send you back to kind of work on it your own. I'm not going to do a, step-by-step with me kind of situation, just to say. But ask questions, please. Anything I talk about, if you have any questions, let me know. I just looking at a couple notes. Painting for joy and self-expression, not to compare with other people, or you find we have such resources today on YouTube and online, and we can look at what other people do, and there's videos that explain how they do it or show how they do it, and those are great. We didn't have those back when I'm looking around. I think most of us were younger. So that's wonderful access. This is fluid, and because it's watercolor, what watercolor is made of is ground pigment, which is in all your paints in different mediums, and then they mix it with different things. For watercolor, it's basically glycerin, sometimes honey, some sort of binder like a gum arabic or something. So there's not too much binder in there. And we mix it with water, and that balance between the water and the paint is the important thing. It's also the trickiest thing. So that's what we want to work toward. I'll come back to that. Supplies. I sent out a supply list. You don't have to have exactly what I have. You can look around at some people who've been painting a while. See, they have different things. I think this is one of these are good, but I didn't suggest this. This palette, this wasn't the one I suggested, was it? I mean, I tried to, for anybody starting out, yeah, it was this one. But this is very good. On these, if you're putting your paints out on these, the best thing is to put them on one side, because after you leave class, you're going to close it, right? And if you tip this thing up on its side, all your colors are going to run together. So I want to show this on the video. This, put your paints here, and then make sure you carry it out flat. I would, when I get home, open it and let it dry a bit. But still try to remember. That's why I use a flat box. I put my palette in the flat box and keep it flat so it doesn't. And these are all mixing areas. So this is a great place to start. Large mixing areas are wonderful. If you're going to use these, you're going to have to take all those papers off. It's similar to what Robin has here, which is some, is this yours? I'm sorry.
Yeah, go ahead.
You have to switch it up because it will get messy. I'm gonna, these look like fairly good quality.
I asked for good quality. I don't know the difference.
I don't know these. They look like they're Korean, which the Koreans do some really nice,
Thank you.
nice things. My palette is here. I went through a number of different palettes over the years. I don't use a lot of different colors like that. I try to keep it simple. I usually have in your color wheel. Do you understand color wheel? Is everyone pretty good with the color wheel? Where's my color wheel? Here it is. You know, that has your basic colors. And your primary colors are your red, yellow, and blue. You mix two of those together, you get your secondary colors. So red and yellow make orange, yellow and blue make green. So orange, green, and purple are your secondary colors. A little wheel like this will help you decide if you're going to use, so those are primary colors, good, secondary colors. Then you have your complementary color. Your complementary color, let me find a good one to start with. Say we choose red, that's one of our primary colors. I'm just going over terms right now. So we have red. The complement of red will be the opposite on the color wheel. So red, if you take and mix your other two primaries, which are yellow and blue, you would get green. So the complement of red is the mixture of the other two. And the same with like blue, you mix red and yellow, you get green, orange. So that's your secondary colors. And that creates it a complement. And the two aspects you can use complementary colors for are by putting them side by side each other, it will intensify the color in comparison. The second aspect of a complementary color is if you mix them, you will get a more neutral tone, kind of a grade tone. So those are the two uses of your complementary colors. Another, and I'm going to send this to you. I'm going over this aspect right now. So I'll email this sheet to you, and it goes over this. Another situation with colors is if you have the ones that are like a family of color on the color wheel, they're near each other. Those are analogous colors. And they work nicely together. So you can have this family, you can have down this family. So those are analogous. So those are some of the main terms that I will use when talking about color. Within, any questions on that? No. Within each color, for instance, if we have yellow, you can have a warm and a cool. What do I mean by that? I'm looking for, this seems pretty clear, this one. So if I have a yellow, for instance, and if I go slightly from the yellow toward the blue side of the wheel, that makes it a cooler yellow. So you have more of a kind of a lemony yellow, just as a general term. If you go from the yellow and you head toward the red side, you're getting a warmer yellow, because we tend to think of blue as cool and red as warm. So for each color, that they each have kind of a warm and a cool. So to simplify, here's your yellow. So this would be a cool yellow, kind of lemony, and this would be a warm yellow. They're both still yellows. They're just cool and warm. And the red, a warm red and a cool red. Blues, you have a warm blue, which is kind of a cerulean, and a cool blue. Now there's other paints within these families, but those are the basics. And if I'm doing a basic palette, I will do a warm and a cool of each of the primaries. And then I will add some earth tones. Earth tones, like for in the yellow family, it's the yellow ochre. It's the mustardy one. In the red family, you have a couple. You have burnt sienna, which is kind of a brick color, or burnt umber, which is a dark brown color. And in the blues, there's usually the cobalts in between. So you have cerulean, which is kind of a greenish, a warm blue, and the ultramarine blue, which is a cool blue. And then I also use cobalt quite a bit. I do have a little bit of green on my palette. I don't need it. I use it because it's quick sometimes. You can mix a green so fast with yellows and blues that you really don't need a green tube. I also have lamp black. I think it's lamp black. It's one of the blacks. But I have it because Payne's Gray is very popular in watercolor. Payne's Gray is a black with a little bit of ultramarine blue in it. And if you're going along and you forget that there's blue in it and you start mixing it with yellow, you're going to get a green. Even though you think, oh, wait, this is black. This is just going to dull it down. I don't use black that often, but every now and then, if I want something very deep and rich, I will use it to kind of bring the value down. Value is how light or dark something is. Okay. Yes. There's color. Basic, simple. Most of you know this, I think, but I wanted to be sure we're all on the same page. No questions? So you can come in these, your paints can come in cakes. Andy has this really great one that she just recently found. I'm gonna move these. Nice little travel palette, if you want. And that would work great with one of these water brushes. These water brushes, and I use it on mine as well. This is my little travel palette. It's a brush, but it has water in it. And you can just pick up a little bit at a time. So it's great for going out with sketching. And if I have, which I always have with me, I have it in this little bag, my sketchbook. I leave it in the car, and I'm always doing little sketches. Because I find by doing sketches, instead of working from a photograph, that working from a sketch is more, it's fresher. It's more me rather than what a lot of people do when we get to a photograph. We tend to almost copy it. And that's, you don't really want that. But with the colors, and I've started playing around with that little brush, is you can start just making little color notes in your sketchbook. This is my favorite little sketchbook. Again, I've tried over the years different ones. This is a Strathmore.
Yeah, it looks like that, but I have.
When you buy it in the store, Beth has
And they sell them at Cheap Joe's on that table.
visual journals.
She just took this part off.
Yep.
This is on the front and the back, this hard thing.
And see how it says 140-pound watercolor? This is watercolor paper.
Yeah, they have it mixed also, but if for watercolor, it's great. It's good for charcoal, it's good for pencil, it's good for anything.
This is good for anything.
Because it
And
has a little tube.
it doesn't wrinkle. You get the thinner
Yeah.
paper in the other ones, and they'll tend to wrinkle as they're out. This does not tend to wrinkle. I have my favorite sketch tools too, but that's another whole situation. Because charcoal and graphite, which is regular pencil, will smudge in your sketchbook. So you have the cakes like Andy has. You have cakes like I showed with. See, Robin, your name's hiding, and I'm trying to that's my fault. Yeah. Like little cakes this way. July you have, and you have the tube paints. If you end up painting a lot, I really recommend the tube paints because these are going to last you forever. And that's what I fill mine with, is tube paints. And actually in the little travel one, it started with cakes, but now I don't replace it with the cakes. I replace it with, I just put tube paint in there. And tube paints, I inherited some from my grandmother. She wasn't a serious watercolor, but she painted. She did it for fun. And they were all dried out. And these were the old lead tubes. So I had to cut them open with a utility knife and dig out the paint. But the paint was still good, even though it was dry, because you put a little water on it and it will soften up. Those are some of our paints. Brushes are important. I have my basic brushes. If you have a flat, for me, these are my favorites. And you don't have to. Beth doesn't use flats, right?
I use them sometimes.
Sometimes.
But I got away from them.
Andy,
Because when
do you
I learned
use flats?
years ago, I did it on rounds.
Sometimes.
Honestly.
Yep.
It's whatever you get used to, and
Yeah.
there's
This
lot
is
of
a flat
people
because
that-
it can have a nice chiseled edge on it, or it can make a nice wide mark. And then some sort of, pointed, I call them calligraphy brushes, that will get rather fat at this end, but also very pointy at the end. So you can go way up on the tip and get a fine line, or you can lay it down and get some nice shapes. Anybody who's taken my introduction to watercolor knows that. I know I've got a couple so just want to make sure we cover. And then other tools. I mean, you can use, there's a bigger wash brushes. An old toothbrush is nice. If you're going to do textures and things, these are just some ideas you can kind of gather at home. I have these thin little line brushes. These are rigger brushes. So if you're doing thin lines, this is really great for that. Natural sponges are wonderful for textures. Plastic wrap. I don't know, there's usually some here, but I don't see it right off. Yeah, up on the top. This is my trick for rocks, mostly. It's great for rocks. And paper towels and different tissues. I use a variety because different ones will make different marks on your paper. I don't use this so much, but it's kind of nice, something like this. This is not recommended. I'm just giving you ideas now. But this I would have. You need an old card of some sort. Great tool for scraping and creating more textures. There's so many things you can use. Again, back to this particular brush. I like this one because it has a beveled tip at the end. And as you're painting along, if you need to scratch into that, your tool's right there. You just turn your brush over and you have it. Paper, very important. I have started here with a less expensive paper. It's just a Canson paper because often I will use a less expensive paper because I'm thrifty to practice brush strokes and things like that before I get into a more serious painting. But if you're going to do a painting, you really need a quality paper, and this Arches is my favorite type. It's a little expensive, but it's worth it. You can, after you use one side, if it doesn't come out, you can use the back side. Or sometimes you can tape it down tightly, not with masking tape, you need a stronger tape for this, and you can often wash it off. And it'll leave a ghost, a little stain on there, but you can often paint over that.
Are the Arches papers, like, I don't remember seeing an orange cover.
That's rough.
Oh, it's
Right, they come in different,
purple and...
good point, thank you, that brings that up. So in your papers, hot press paper is going to be smooth. They actually, when they're making the paper, they put a hot press and iron it down, and it makes it smooth. Your middle grade paper is a cold press, and you'll tend to have a little texture on it. Is that the cold press, Beth? So the cold press has the green cover. That's my favorite. That's the most popular. And then the rough is they don't do much to it at all. I also have some handmade paper that I bought in France that is really rough. It's so much fun. And you get to learn and know your different materials. So try not to jump around too much, but that's why I recommend this is solid. What was it? We said Fabriano. I've not had good luck with Fabriano's. Canson paper, I've not been happy with. This is, and beginners often start with less expensive materials, and that just makes it more challenging when you're starting out. So simplify. 8 colors, you know, the 2 of each of the primaries, a couple earth tones, a couple really good brushes,
Sorry, I have a paper question.
and good paper.
Would you talk about sizing? I know you did.
Oh, sizing, yeah, especially your cheaper papers. These are rag papers. This is made out of rag. This cheaper paper I have on here is probably paper fiber, like tree fiber. And what they'll do often is they put a sizing on it. Sizing is like starch. And they put that on there. And I'm not sure really why they do it. But what I will often do, I came in this morning and I got my spray bottle, my blue spray bottle.
There.
Oh, there it is.
It's on the cheaper paper more than the...
It tends to be more on the cheaper paper.
But some expensive papers, they do.
But some do too, yeah.
Like Winsor Newton, they do. And you have to just like sponge it off.
Yeah, I spray it down.
I couldn't remember what it was.
The Winsor Newton, and then I wipe it up with a clean sponge to get some of that sizing off, and then let it dry.
On both sides?
You can, yeah. I didn't today. Because I already had it taped down, and I'm just going to use this. So when I flip it over, I would probably do that on the other side. Yeah, Beth has researched. She's like my mom. She researches things. That's why I didn't research. I could always go to my mom and like, Mom, what's the best, most
gonna
permanent
say,
color? What's the
sure.
most?
If you're looking to mix and practice strokes, this will work just fine.
And it's
And they-
called visual journey when you look at it.
That's exactly what it looks like.
Take a picture of it if you want when you go down to
And
Cheap
see,
Joe's.
And on the inside, it has this hard cover, and Terrilynn travels with her, so she just took it off.
I put stickers and stuff at the different places I go.
But it won't work if you're wetting the whole thing, because then the sizing thing gets in, and you've got to, you should put it on a board like you have it with masking
Yeah.
tape, and then it will settle down and you're fine. If you paint wet on wet, you need that,
But for
just practicing
studies,
strokes like I was practicing strokes, you can just do that. And Terrilynn had this great idea to put the card she mentioned, and just draw around it, and then you kind of contain it, But it is a great idea. I mean, it works. And this is great. So, because it's good for all of that, and then you don't have to worry you're using your arches to practice on. You can use this or something.
So the sizing isn't used to like keep it flat or anything like, doesn't seem to have a function?
Because it's 100% cotton, when it gets wet, it's going to shrink. A rag, 100% rag cotton. And then you have to, if you leave it alone and you've got it taped down, it will go out, get a little bubbly maybe, and then it'll settle down, and then you're fine.
Mhm.
is that what the sizing's for though? No, I don't know what
That's not
sizing
the
is.
sizing's for. I don't know. Any rag paper though, the reason we tape it down, if you're doing wet on wet, you wet the paper, and then sometimes arches you don't have to unless you're gonna like pour water on it, but I can spray it or wet it down with a brush. And then if you put paint on it and do that, you get different techniques, and wet on wet is different than
Yeah.
wet meaning a wet brush on a dry paper.
So I don't really know what the sizing is for. I think
don't
it's because it's paper fiber, tree fiber, rather than
It's a
cotton.
combination.
rag.
Some of them are combinations
Yep.
of wood fiber and cotton.
But they're adding it. It's got to be.
It's kind of like a
Adhesive.
synthetic, they don't act like cotton either, like a synthetic shirt or whatever. It doesn't act like cotton. It's kind of like that. And so they add the sizing probably to hold it together. If you put water on it.
I mean, if you really get into watercolor too, you want your paper to pull in some of that paint and that water. Other, like gouache, you want it to sit on the surface. So with the sizing there, it'll sit more on the surface of the paper and not get sponged into the paper.
Because the cheaper stuff paper, which I was one of those people who started out with the cheap, it falls. The paint falls.
Yeah, it does.
Goes up in the middle.
Because it bubbles up the paper and
Yeah.
kind of
Yeah.
We all
Yeah.
started that way.
Right,
Yes.
if you tape it down, and again, this is paper, any paper is going to act a bit like a sponge, absorb the water, because there's now more molecules in that paper with the water in there. There's no place for it to go except up. And then as it dries and the water leaves, it'll flatten back out. That's partially why we tape it, because that way it won't shrink back in and wrinkle the other way. It'll wrinkle with the water, and then sometimes as it's drying, it wrinkles.
Do you ever use tape on the block?
This block is it's sealed on the edges.
So that
It's already
you don't wanna
pre-taped.
do it for a border or.
You could. I mean, there's no reason.
Oh yeah. Oh, you mean like a little white border or something? Yeah. Of course.
And they even, for that size, they sell the tape 1/4 inch, and you can just like.
And this, on these blocks, there's usually a little blank place here where you can I usually take a butter knife to go in to remove the paper from the block. Go at a 45-degree angle in whatever direction you're going in when you're taking that off. Try not to go straight. Actually go at this is not sharp enough to do that, but a 45-degree angle. The same with your tape. When you're taking your tape off your paper, pull it off at a 45-degree angle away from the paper. If you pull, your paper wants to be dry, because if you take your tape off and your paper is still wet, it's going to rip the paper. All these little things. Again, Beth studies. She researches. She writes things down. It's wonderful. And you purchased a number of different samples of paper. So she's gone through all these papers. I did it decades ago, so it's not as fresh in my mind as it is in hers. She also has gone through and done color mixing studies. In prior classes, I had a little chart to hand out, but you can do this yourself. So she started with her lemon yellow here, and she put LY for lemon yellow. And then she mixed it with whatever colors on this side. And she wrote down basically the percentage that she did so she can see if you're looking for, say, this color, what colors do I mix? She has a nice chart. She mixed the lemon yellow and the burnt umber to get that wonderful soft gray. You don't have to do this, but you learn so much when you do something like this. Look at this.
That's impressive.
She showed me that. I'm like, oh my God, this is wonderful.
Wow.
So, and she's very generous and sharing, and she will talk to you about it. And I love these grays in here.
I was
Like-
amazed. I mean, it was a learning experience, but I was surprised. And it's not accurate. I mean, I didn't measure 10% or whatever, but I just kind of guesstimated. And in the back of that, I wrote down how many greens, grays, reds I found, and it was not pinks. I mean, I was just like floored.
She just kept going.
And I just did it like with basically these colors. You know, I didn't have like 30 colors. I had, this is 20. I think I had 15 when I did it.
You don't need a lot. You can mix those basic colors I told you before. You can mix anything with those. You don't need to buy 20, 50
don't.
tubes.
The others are like convenience colors.
Yeah.
Mostly.
But look at these wonderful grays, and how do you get that? So that's,
What paper? Oh, that's the 140.
yeah.
Okay.
They have it in that size, or they have it in this size. They have both.
They also have, not in the notebooks, but Arches has, and you buy them individual sheets, full sheets, which are usually about this big. And then you can bend, and I have a video on how to do that, bend and fold them to make them smaller. You can cut them, but I like the deckled edge, which is the little rough edge when they make the handmade paper. There's also one 300-pound paper. So this is 140, and there's a 300-pound. The 300-pound paper is stiff. You don't have to tape it down. It's great stuff for traveling, because then you don't have to carry out extra boards and stuff. The 300-pound paper, but it's a little costly, but it's wonderful. Tape. I use masking tape, and the only two tapes I use beige and I use black. The reason I don't use, and go ahead and use up your blue tapes, but when you are painting with color, that blue tape is going to influence the overall impression of your painting.
Oh, that's interesting.
Because we were talking about colors and juxtaposition. If you were doing basically a red painting, warm tones, russets and stuff, we got fall going on, that blue is going to make that seem more intense, the red more intense by comparison. So then when you take the blue tape off, it's not going to seem as intense because that contrast is gone.
I'm just thinking about, because being a teacher too,
That's
the tricks with the paper so it doesn't, the tape so it doesn't tear. The one is to put it on like my leg, the tape before I put it down.
Oh,
because
yes.
the fibers
Yeah.
and the material make it easier to pull off.
So what she's saying, it won't stick. If you're finding it's too sticky when you go to take it off, just touch it onto your cloth, put it down, and it just helps when you go to remove it. Makes it a little easier to remove.
And if I keep the tape there overnight for some reason, I do use a heat gun because
That helps.
that makes it come off all the more easier.
I was pulling some off yesterday on some of these
That's
that I had. Like this painting's old on here, but what I've done with this one is I painted over it with a Daniel Smith watercolor ground because I want to put layers on this, but that's another whole experimental thing. But yeah, if the masking tape stays on something for a while, it will not come off. It gets very stubborn. Okay, any questions? That's kind of supplies. It takes a little time to go over supplies. Oh, I have 2 spray bottles, my rough one and my mister. So this
That's mine.
That's not mine.
That it is mine, but you
Here's
can,
mine.
But you can use it if you want to use it.
And I'll play around with these until I find the right one. This one, you can see this. I don't know if you can see it. There's nothing black to go up against. It makes droplets, and sometimes that irregularity is really nice. This mister is more misty, and those can give you different effects. I was doing these waves. I was just practicing and playing around. This is not a good paper, and I thought, I said, if I can do this on not great paper, just think what I can do on good paper. This was with the mister, the little green one there, and I just get those at the dollar store. So you create textures with some of these things. A water tub, you want at least one water tub. These are collapsible, which is really nice. There are cups on the top shelf there if you need water, like what Sherry has, something like that. As I'm traveling, I like things light and easy. As I set up my palette, I will set my paper in front of me, my palette to the right, because I'm right-handed. Any lefties in here? Palette to the right, and then my brushes. And you can see my brushes, I have extra brushes, but I will put my sponge down and I set my brushes on top of it this way. Yeah, and so I just wanted to show the video that. So I keep those right there. I can quickly grab them. I have extra tools above, paper towels, everything's within reach. So yeah, if you're right-handed, that's the best way to do. What is
My brush nest,
a brush nest?
it's actually a soap dish.
It's a what?
Soap dish.
Oh, that's a good idea.
Here's Andy's soap dish brush nest. That's pretty neat. It's got little V's in it to hold the brushes. Because you do not, one thing you do not want to do is take your brush and leave it in the water. Brushes are made, whether they're this type or the other type, the hair are usually almost twice as long in here. They take it, they wrap it with a string, they put it inside the metal or this plastic part, and these are called the ferrules. And I'll use this one as an example. So the hair goes down in like that. It's wrapped with string. They add glue inside the ferrule, and then they clamp it in the shape that they want it in. So when they clamp it this way, it makes a flat brush. When they wrap it this way on the outside, it's a round brush. If you leave your brush in the water, first of all, it's going to bend the hair. This is hair. It's going to curl, right? If you leave your curlers on longer, it curls more. It will curl the end of the brush, and the water will get up inside, and it will dissolve that glue, and eventually the hairs of the brush will start falling out. So try not to be in a habit of leaving it in the water. I'll come around and yell at people. I don't yell, actually. But either set it like this on your tub or onto the sponge. I like the sponge because it doubles as finding my balance for water. Picking up water, looks like it's too much. I just touch it to the sponge, and then I can come into my palette. So it has a dual purpose there. If you're going to sketch, I use a very light pencil, but we're not going to sketch today. Just a very light, hard pencil. A number 2 is fine. All right. So we're going to play around with our water. Everybody have water? You don't have water, Beth. Do you have?
No, I just had this little thing in this empty bottle.
Okay. Finding a balance.
Right here.
It's right here, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's at just the right spot. So again, I don't have, real fancy paper right now, but I'm going to play. So if we pick up some water, and the balance of water to paint, that is the vital thing. And I try to emphasize 4 levels of wetness. So you have really wet, which would be, we'll call it gloss. And this is when you put it on the paper, it looks wet. So it's glossy. And then as it starts to dry, it kind of goes through a sheen stage where you can still see it, but you're beginning to see, you can still see the water sitting on top, but you're beginning to see some of the texture of the paper. And then you hit a matte stage. A matte stage is when you don't see any shine from the water anymore, but the paper, if you touch it, and if you're going to touch it, use the back of your little finger usually, and if it's cool, then it's still damp. And you touch it and it's still damp, but it doesn't look like there's water sitting on it. Does that make sense? And then the last stage, of course, is dry. So these 4 stages are what we're going to be playing with. So if I take, do you want to come up a little bit? Yeah. Try not to bump my camera.
You want us all up?
Yeah. Beth, you don't have to, it depends on how you're feeling back there. Okay.
I just have to put it up, I can't keep it down.
All right.
Maybe I'm in the way with all that stuff.
It's the nature of art. This is what we do. So I want to try some aspects. I'm going to send you folks these informational sheets too. I don't know where that first one went. Those are tools. Oh,
Sorry.
Don't breathe, sorry.
I know. I have another one, but so we're working on some of these first thing. See, I don't know what time it is because it's my clock. How we got?
10:53.
Okay.
2-hour class.
Yep. Yeah, I know that. I know that. I want to practice some strokes and some things, so you guys can do this quickly. But water. So if I put this on immediately, and the way I'm going to tell if it's how wet it is tilt it into the light. And I can see that I'm almost at the sheen stage already. But if you see water sitting on top, that's going to be your wet stage. So you can wet it first and then add paint. It's not much paint. And you can see as you add it into wet, it does some beautiful textural things. Or you can, I want it wet. I got to remember what I'm doing here. So that's wet into wet, but you can also just do wet right onto the paper. This paper, because of what it is going to handle the paint differently than this one would. So play around with that. So we have a flat wash. You can have a graded wash. You notice how I dip into the water. I wipe off the excess water. I want this wet. If I wanted it not so wet, I would touch it to the sponge. And notice when I touch it to the sponge, I will touch it like at the fat part of the brush, not at the tip, because you could actually have paint on the tip of your brush and go like, oh, it's not wet enough. Dip it in there, touch it there to balance out the water and not disturb your paint. Now I've done something different here because I'm showing different things. Graded wash, I'm just adding water and see how it's taking that orange and it's just making it go lighter as it goes down. That's great for skies and things. Wet on wet, you could take another color. I think this is still, I can look at this now and this is what you get used to doing. See how wet, this is still very wet. This is at the sheen stage. So this would be a good time to drop in another color. That's got a whole particle on that one. Which is not good to do. I just grabbed it quickly. But when you pick up paint from your palette, do work it a little bit onto your, from the, what is this? The tub. The tub?
It is now.
Go ahead. There's a word for it, and I'm missing it right now.
A well?
A well is good. Well is good. So this way you can see if there's any part. See that particle was there, so I just pushed it off to the side. I don't want that, and I won't end up with that.
What happens if you leave those particles?
It'll just, see it disperse?
Yeah.
Because the water's there, but then eventually it'll just stay.
Eventually this will dry. That'll stay because it's just a chunk of paint, which I didn't mix in. later on, I can either just leave it there, or when it's totally dry, I can try to remove it. Don't try to remove it
If it's
now.
totally dry and you wet it, it might spread again a little bit.
That's true.
But, you know, depends on.
Yeah,
the
we can
amount.
wait for this to totally dry, which I'll try to do.
I mean, you can do all kinds of effects. There's no right or wrong.
And this is why with the less expensive paper, see, I got particles, so now I got to mix it on the paper. Mud, who was talking about mud? No, it was, she's gone now. But if you keep working it on the paper, it's going to dull your color. You want to decide what you're going to do, get some nice fresh paint, make sure it's consistent and not particly, and just make the decision and get it down there. And then leave it. It's a partnership with you, the paint, and the water.
In the paper.
And the paper, yes, I know. Teamwork going on here. So I'm sorry, I'm hiding. So I wet this toothbrush. I always wet the tools I'm using. And then I dried it on the sponge. The video can't see this, I don't think. Kind of dried it. And then back here, I'm running my thumb along like this. I don't want to splatter people. Like that. And it flicks the water. But you can also do it to flick the paint. See how you get that nice little subtle effect for texture. So that works for so many things, like sand on a beach or texture on a rock, or who knows. Anything you want. Color and color. Stamping. Stamping would be taking something like a sponge or anything. Let me get, I'm picking up some paint. Press it, and you have a texture. Our paper towels and things. This one's very wet. If that's too wet and you're worried about the buckling again, you can just hold the edge of the paper towel there to see how it's acting like a sponge, absorbing some of that water without disturbing the painting. Or you can crinkle this up or do anything with it, and you can press it. And that's not a good example. I'm going to get some of this. Sometimes I look at that shape that the paper towel is doing so I can press it. And now you see the mechanical thing from the paper towel. I don't like that. But if you did this and you kept pressing and pressing, you're not gonna have any texture. You want to kind of make that decision, commit to it, and then you're done. Good for clouds and things. If you want, you can come back in, because that's dry area. If you notice, if I put paint around it, that dry area is going to resist the paint, and that extra paint is going to blend into where it's still kind of wet.
And that's exactly what you do with saran wrap.
Oh, the ceramic, okay.
Or bubble.
Or bubble, yeah. That works too. That's amazing, isn't it?
Yeah, the bubbles,
Yeah,
that's
that's
right.
really cool.
Yeah, let me try to do a couple. It's interesting we call it saran wrap still. Plastic wrap. So you can make this. You can do lines. You can make it crinkly, but you can put it on when it's fairly wet. You have to be at the wet stage or the sheen stage. Anything beyond, it's not really going to see. This is dry already down here, and it's not doing too much. Press that down, and then you leave it alone. Wait for it to dry. I have salt. I found this wonderful little container years ago, so it fits in my palette. Except the salt doesn't come out. Got some moisture in there. These are some techniques that take a little time.
Try it here because there's still sheeny around there.
Yeah, but it's got particles on
Yeah,
it.
it does.
I don't know if it'll work on that. So that we'd have to wait a bit.
I've been having fun with alcohol.
Yeah.
Spraying it.
I have an alcohol spray, but not with me. It's in my pastel bag. And, oh, again, it should be at the sheen stage, and that's not. That's pretty much at the matte stage.
You're right, it's dry in here.
It's very dry in here. Your atmosphere has a huge effect on how fast it's going to dry. It's basically air conditioned in here, and it dries really fast.
That's a big difference.
So if you're worried about it drying fast, take your mister and just kind of spray the air around you, you know, humidify. Misters, look at that. I didn't do this one. I test this one off to the side. See, at first it doesn't spray, and then I see what it's doing.
Yeah, you did about it.
Got a little bit. It'll push it away and create a nice texture. This is not, you can, now if you do this when it's still at your sheen stage, you're going to get dark lines. But if you do it more when it's at the matte stage, I'm going to try here. So here, it dug into the paper and the paint went, oh, and it fell into that little trough that this created in the paper. Here, it's scraping it away. So that's a timing thing. It's another timing thing. And you can use this for large areas if you want. That's not going to work because that's too dry and that's wetter. Then, after you play with all of these, you start combining them. So if we could take maybe 10 or 15 minutes for you guys to play with this, I'll show you this when it's done. I don't think it's dry enough yet. See, if I start to lift the plastic and the paint moves, that means it's not quite ready. But I'll show you because you'll be gone. So this is great for rocks or trees or a number of different things. And I'll get some plastic if you want to try that. Ready to play? You want to? Any questions? Any thoughts?
Do you ever
Don't know enough.
do these, like what you were doing
Yeah.
with the scraper with a brush?
Oh yeah, with like this brush.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's what that handle is for. You know, you just turn it over and.
What about the brush side?
You can do different effects with different brushes. Like if you even have like a harder brush, what's that? You know, Trader Joe's
Bristle
sells
brush.
them. It's or that like bristle brush. I didn't bring mine, but it's.
I've got one down in my box there,
I
but
kind of came upon it by accident, I guess.
I'm not sure what you're asking. I guess.
Pressing. Am I going to ruin my brush by pressing it? Even on some.
You mean
part
like
of the,
this?
Yeah, even some part of the metal.
I don't know if it'll get to the metal without really breaking
Really
those hairs
breaking
there. That's why it's nice just to have an old card and then you can.
But a bristle brush, you know,
Yeah.
like the kind
Yeah, I have one.
in the hardware store.
Yeah.
You can do grasses with. You can also press those down because they're, or oxtail. They're a little more stiff. You can find stiffer brushes.
Yeah. Just little craft brushes.
Yeah.
Will do different things.
And do you ever use the Chinese bamboo ones?
I did.
And what do you use those for?
Well, they're like a round brush. They're my calligraphy brush, so they do the same thing as this.
The bristles are different usually.
They're slightly different.
So
With the
calligraphy brushes are usually like
Oh.
a squirrel brush, and they're real soft hair.
practice,
That's all right.
brush strokes. This can make a nice wide stroke, and then if you turn it, you get a nice thin stroke. So this is good for very thin strokes like that.
It's great for fence posts.
Yeah. Or you can do this. I'm running out of paper here. Make a cool ribbon thing. This is great for, oh, come on. I'm tapping it because I want it to point. If you're buying a brush in the store and you're wondering if it's going to get that sharp chiseled point, ask them for a cup of water. get the sizing off the brush, because new ones always come with a sizing, almost like a hairspray on it. Get it soft, and then off to the side, tap it. And when you tap it that way, there's a nice chisel point, it's a good brush.
Cheap Joe's will let you do that if you tell them, if you ask
Yep,
them. I
just
want to
ask
just test
them.
this, can I do it, to see how thin it'll get. They don't mind.
I don't think I have any that don't, my good brushes that do that, but say take it something like this and you go like, oh look, it's kind of it's a nice point, right? And then you go like this, and no, it's gonna splay.
Oh.
That's extreme example. But with this, you can do, I was looking at the tip of the brush and there was too much paint on it. There was like a blob there. That's why I just touched it here. Oh, it's the coffee shakes. So you can start with thin. Is that wet? It's still damp. I need more paint. See how I didn't have enough paint that time? Now I'm looking at the tip of the brush, because look, if I touch it like that, it's going to be wider. If I touch it there, it's thinner. And that's just by looking at my tip. Press down, press down. Turn my brush a little bit to get that thin point again. And the nice thing about having your paper on something like this is you get going through that, turn your paper. There's nothing that says your paper has to stay at the same place all the time. And you can come around, you can do thin curves, you know. So that's great. That's when you start doing brush strokes. And there's whole books on calligraphic brush strokes, like Chinese brush strokes.
But those strokes you can also do with a round brush.
That was my round brush.
No, I mean like not a calligraphy brush.
But they're kind of the same
They're
thing.
kind of the same, but a calligraphy brush can be more pliable.
Yeah, I can't find these brushes anymore.
You can't-
I used to buy these from my students, and they were great. They were like $5 a piece, and it's just wonderful. How much are these guys? 15?
or more, depending on the size.
Yeah.
And so you get a really good.
But see how I'm way up on the tip of the brush, just so I'm staying right on the hairs, and then I press it down, and then I lift it back up. So I'm kind of tip, and I drag it a little bit, and then I press down, and then I lift. So you learn that pressure and the amount of paint and the amount of water. And look how complex this is now. But the best thing to do is play with it. Just go and play with some of these things. Boy, that was another at least 5 minutes out of
This came
you
out
guys'
so
paintings.
good. I've waited overnight and still don't get that really good.
It's the amount of wetness when you put that on.
Okay.
Here's another thing. If it's not, you're finding it's not wet enough, I'm just going to go here. That's pretty. See, this would be a good time. It's still quite wet. Now's the time to put it on. Right? Kind of hold it there. Sometimes I will weight it. Something
Oh,
flat.
Yeah.
I mean, this one you took off so quickly.
Yeah, that was because it's so dry in here, and this is cheaper paper. On your rag paper, this is going to hold the moisture longer than this.
Yeah,
That's
just walked away
why.
for a while.
When my-
Yeah, I've left it
Yeah.
overnight and still got nothing. So. Okay.
That-
But
Maybe
I
it
can-
wasn't wet enough.
Very
Yeah,
carefully,
it might not have been.
and you have to touch the edge. And look how this blue will kind of spread its own way in to that red.
Because it's still wet. You can't do that later, though.
No, you can't. But then with this, gosh, you guys keep coming up with things to talk about. Sorry. Now I can come in and I can say, oh, this looks like a branch. And then you have this natural form to follow. I'm trying to brace because I've got, this is the thing with coffee. So you could follow some of those natural lines that are already there, or you could put leaves or flowers out on the end. You know, you can do almost anything with that. I like it because it's not, I don't have to try to create this texture. The plastic wrap does it for me.
Cool.
I can tell right now this is too wet to take off. So if I lift this, see how the paint's moving with the plastic here at the edge? So that's telling me don't do it. Go play. Any questions? I'm going to come around, so if you really... I need to get organized again. I keep trying to move things around to... Oh, shoot.
What about,
I'm going to try this lower one. So I want the sky. I want it quite damp, but I don't want it super wet. This is going to be wet and wet. See the clouds there? Okay. Wet and wet. And I'm not going to make it exact. I'm just using the photo as like a starting spot. The sky's kind of a soft golden yellow, maybe a hint of, see how I just pick up a little paint with the corner of my brush there, mix it in there, and then kind of drop it in here. And I'm making it very irregular. See how I'm just like, what I'm doing with the brush? Let's see if we can get some lightness. See those particles? I'm going to leave those alone until it's dry, and then I'll try to brush them off.
I love when I get those, but I usually do some water on it.
It depends, yeah, on what you're doing. Every time I touch this, there's a color in my brush. I'm not happy with that. It's probably because my water's dirty. Yeah, if you start finding that there's residual color, go get fresh water. So I'm just a little paint there. I'm just kind of laying it in. This is still fairly wet, so that will kind of blend. Now I'll add in some of those grayish clouds. A nice gray is any blue and kind of one of your earth tone reds. That looks kind of nice. So you can test the color here. This is why the palettes are white, so you can see it. I'll put a little bit behind here. I want this to spread a bit more at the top, so I'm just spraying along that area. If I want, I can also take this and blot. You can also take a paper towel and, I'm looking for my other paper, like twist it like this sometimes. And remember, if you're doing that, try to blot and then leave it. See the texture there? If I keep working on it, it'll go away. And if the paper towel gets damp, it's not going to show as much. I'm going to do one more right there, see how that works. Just kind of add some variety in the clouds. I think I want a little more, but lighter. Oops, not lighter. Oh.
Or darker.
Or darker, whatever. It's not like you go, oops, okay. With watercolor, you get all these like little happy surprises almost. I want this edge here to become, I want it to get to the matte stage. This is a fairly sharp edge along the mountain, but see how it has the trees up there. So I'm going to prepare a color. I'm starting with what the predominant color of those mountains are, is kind of an ultramarine blue.
Is this a photograph? Or
It's a photograph. No, it's a photo. I color intensified it.
Oh.
So that, and I don't usually use green, but I'm going to add a touch of green here. And then I'm hoping that this is going to work. And I'm just kind of irregularly going along. I need a little more water because because I want it lighter back here. So I just touched it in the water, dried it a little bit, bring it along behind here. A little more water now. And I don't want a sharp edge there. If I left that edge, I would have a sharp line like that. Look at those, it was a little too wet there. So it's taking those trees there, they're gonna be bigger trees. That's all it is. So with watercolor, you can just kind of go, oh, well, that's what I meant. Just bigger trees. If you want to hold it, you can carefully bend your paper towel and just blot it lightly so it doesn't keep going up. A little more blue over this way. I'm gonna make that into a little mountain back there. Now I feel like Bob Ross. Please,
You
please.
don't look like him.
No, thank you. Don't buy Bob Ross stuff. Because, why? I mean, he was wonderful, but you know he got taken at the end of his life, right?
What does that mean?
Yeah.
There's a document.
No, I didn't know
There's a
that.
documentary film on it. This couple became like his partners, and over a certain amount of time, they eventually bought up 51% of his business, and they started controlling him, and he had no control at the end. His kids have not inherited anything.
Wow.
Yeah, they were
Crime.
they stole everything.
Bad people
Bad people. Right.
take advantage of an artist.
Look what happened up there.
Yeah, it's
Some of that
gorgeous.
pink is showing through. Did I add pink into that? I don't remember
you did.
doing that, but I did, right?
That's gorgeous.
It's kind of cool.
Might have been in the water too. Yeah.
It was in the water. You're right. Look at that. Okay, that is really intense. So I'm bringing in this yellow. I'm thinking of this, but it's too yellow. I don't want it quite yellow. What am I going to add to make it not so yellow? What's the complement of yellow?
Purple.
Yes. So I'll grab a little purple.
Oh, purple.
Now it's gotten a little, it's more grayed, but I kind of like that. But in the back, I want it a little lighter, so I've just touched it in water to add more water into that. And I don't mind if that blends up a little bit. A little more of this. Let's see as it comes. So I haven't drawn, but I'm drawing in my mind here. So this is that top hill there. And try to constantly change your color. So it's not the same. If it's all flat color across there, it's going to be kind of boring. I'm going to pick up some of this green. Why not? It's right there.
And it's interesting, you're using a pretty wide brush.
Good point. I was always taught use the largest tool possible for as long as possible. It will simplify your painting, unify it, because otherwise we get picking in these little tiny details, and that's not always a good thing. Again, I'm just using the photo as a takeoff spot, not that I'm trying to
Why are you
copy it,
leaving the white spots?
because it'll add sparkle.
So that's purposeful. To give
I
you
did.
a little
I wasn't
pop.
thinking about it, but yeah, I'm doing it on purpose to, because otherwise, the lightest you can get in watercolor is the paper. You can't get any lighter. So by leaving some of it sparkling through, it's what adds sparkle to the whole painting. There is not a rule, but people say it's a rule, that leave about 1/3 of the paper showing through.
Ooh, that sounds like a lot.
But if you look, you go and you start looking at watercolors online, some of the strongest ones are that way. Unless you go to like Wyeth. Wyeth had this thing with black, and I'm pretty, he added India ink into his black, and he uses this thick black on some of his stuff. See, this would be a great point for me to pick this one up. Fairly wet. I don't want it too dry. This is very light, so I need more pigment. I picked up the yellow with that corner, and I'm going to pick up green with this corner, just so I can quickly get the paint, but not contaminate my colors. It doesn't have to be perfect. It still reads.
Squint your eyes and it
You
really
squint,
is-
yeah. It reads as a mountain, and here's the foreground, and there's things going on. My road's going down. I can make this into the road if it's dry enough. I didn't choose. I just picked up one of my pointy brushes. I'm going to use kind of a green and some brown. No, don't really like that. I got a lot of particles in my paint
Yeah, why is that?
because they've dried too long.
Okay.
It's my fault, but you can kind of make it work.
So the last class, you said you liked ivory black.
Okay.
Right? I noticed that you didn't mention that today.
Did I not say ivory black? Did I say the other one?
You said
Lamp black.
Yeah.
One of those. Wait, ask Beth. She's our pigment
Lamp
expert.
black is a true black, so that like for pure soot, or you want that. Ivory black, it will granulate a little. Like if you put it on the paper and just go like that, it'll granulate a little.
Do you know what granulating means? That's this. See how that's settled out?
Yeah.
Ivory
It's following the
black
texture of the paper.
is
Yeah.
made from burned animal bone. So it has like charcoal. I read that yesterday in the book.
In one of the books.
Wow.
I'm like, how does she know this?
Tidbit.
I read it yesterday. But it is. It's like, and that makes sense because I like ivory black because it does granulate.
Yeah.
So for just like a really dark something and you just need a touch of it, I would use that. But lamp black, if you really need a black, I have a little tube of lamp black and I pull it out when I
Great.
need it.
And I don't know what this is. I know it's black. Because sometimes I've just picked up things. I try not to use black because it just kind of dulls the color. If you can use color to make color, it's going to be much more interesting. These are like little cypress trees, aren't they?
So the
Guess
paint,
what?
The paint is gray.
Too
and
wet.
Has blue and
It has blue and burned umber in it actually.
burnt umber.
And if you add more burnt umber with it, it will get really, really dark. It's a beautiful dark gray.
Yeah. Okay, I haven't
Yeah.
tried that.
Mix burnt umber with what now? What do you-
Payne's gray
Payne's gray with burnt umber. Okay.
makes a really, or
It's too wet here.
even ultramarine blue.
But notice I'm varying the
That's
sizes
another
and the
dark
shapes of the
gray.
trees. I could put some down in here too.
That's a good way to do that.
It's a lovely painting.
It's a cute little painting, huh? I don't know if I should put some of those up there. Maybe because it's got that's still so wet. I can.
Isn't it funny how
So
some
I
things-
might add some of that up in here, but it's too wet right now. But this will give you an idea of how maybe to approach. This is my burnt umber.
Is this painting going to be on your video or your?
This, I'm making a video of this.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So that's coming out. If I'm careful, maybe I can kind of control that. I kind of like this one. It's like it's getting windblown, whatever's happening back there. And here I'm using a very thin line just to put in, they're not trunks, they're just lines. But I'm trying to put them under wherever a tree might be. What if I want a little texture, it's a little too flat. Just little touches. But it's a way to start. But look already how much lighter, as you said, it's drying a lot lighter. I'm really
Yeah,
liking
that
these
loves
clouds.
that. I love that. What'd you do for that? What'd you do? I missed that.
Dirty water.
Well, I know that's the pinkish stuff.
The
but
pinkish stuff was that, and I started with
Some kind of gray.
a little of the ochre.
Ochre.
Pretty sure ultramarine, wasn't it? The
Yeah.
ultramarine I started with.
It was very wet.
Yeah, and it was very wet. Yeah, I can tell that.
That was wet
That's
and wet, and then
beautiful.
this is
Look
dry
how-
and dry, and it's just. So then, if you're not sure, I don't like this line right here. this is kind of too sharp. So sometimes just I'm not really painting right now, I'm just softening that. By softening the paint, I can try to soften that line. Now that I'm at it, I'm going to try to make it blend into that a little bit. But then step back, put it up somewhere and step back. And it's not a
Yeah.
finished painting, it's just
No,
a quick
that's
little
a great
sketch.
start. That's gorgeous.
This is just
Isn't that amazing about the white? Because when you were painting it, it did look really white.
Yeah,
So
it's
you
terrific.
you wouldn't leave that.
I might
You
not.
could.
It's just this one right here was following the clouds don't usually follow exactly the shape of the mountain behind it or in front of it. What is that? Why is that?
It's a bird.
I don't know what that is. So that was this,